to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makwidir. We begin this morning with a story that is not just of significance, but it's quite seismic. The United States Senate is now considering a new AGOA extension bill that, for the first time in 25 years, explicitly excludes South Africa. It looks like a punitive move wrapped in legislative velvet. The architecture of this political thunderbolt, well, that's U.S. Senator John Kennedy, who says AGOA should now benefit only countries that support U.S. interests and share American values. And his message to South Africa, well, essentially, you are on the wrong side of the U.S. geopolitical scoreboard. You're too close to China, too close to Moscow, and too assertive at the G20 summit. This bill, dubbed the AGOA 2.0, it signals a lot of consequences for South Africa, and amongst other things, it suggests a 2-year extension of AGOA without us, without South Africa being involved, a presidential review of South Africa's entire relationship with the US. Potential sanctions are also on the list, and a hard recalibration of how America engages with South Africa. So we're going to be unpacking all of that, the implications of it if the bill is passed, and to help us unpack the economic, diplomatic, and political ramifications of this, can we say unprecedented move at this point? We'll be joined by someone who's been tracking AGOA quite extensively, Donald Mackay, trade expert at XA International Trade Advisors. Donald, thank you so much for staying with us. Thank you so much for joining us for this interview. I really appreciate your time. Good morning.
Good morning.
I think let's jump right into it. The blunt reality, if the Kennedy bill succeeds, South Africa might find itself kicked out, isolated from AGOA. What is the first economic domino that falls, and is there an AGOA without South Africa?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because certainly South Africa was the largest beneficiary in just absolute terms under AGOA. But having said that, our benefits under AGOA were not huge. So South Africa's benefits under AGOA amounted to about 2 billion rand a year in duty saved, which is not nothing, but relative to our size is quite small. The problem here is, of course, that we don't know what the new AGOA bill, if implemented, for example, will it give relief on those reciprocal tariffs or not? Will it only be the underlying tariffs? We simply don't know. So that's an unknown here. It would not be good to lose, but it also would not really, the AGOA side of this, I don't believe would be devastating to South Africa. Most of our trade with the US has nothing to do with AGOA, and that is because that trade is gold, platinum, that sort of stuff.
And just for the rest of the continent, how much is South Africa involved when it comes to making sure that with the resources and the infrastructure that we have, we're able to make AGOA a possibility for other neighboring countries and other countries in different parts of the African continent? And would there be an impact on them also?
No, I don't think so. So fortunately, this would be, I think the harm would be limited to South Africa. But we must realize this is really a stepping stone. The US does not want this to end with AGOA. So they're very clear that they want this ultimately to become a set of bilateral agreements. And they say they want to pick 5 countries, and they're going to focus their efforts on ultimately, at the end of the 2-year extension, to have proper bilateral agreements in place. I'm not sure what that's worth, to be honest, because the US has bilateral agreements with many countries and they breach them all the time. So the idea of a bilateral agreement in 2025 is very different to what it meant even just a year ago.
Yeah, I think that's very, very important to note. I want to talk about the response of Pretoria now. I think the Department of Trade said renewal prospects with the US are encouraging, but now we're seeing, this bill which essentially explicitly excludes us. Is the South African government and the Department of Trade responding accordingly? Are they being overly optimistic, or is the US just simply flexing its muscle because of other geopolitical, issues involved here?
So I think it's probably both of those, actually, that we're both over optimistic and the US is flexing. I think what's important to note, my reading of the bill is that this is really an attack on the ANC by way of South Africa more than it is simply an attack on South Africa. What's incredibly unusual in a bill like this is to explicitly go after a single political party, to threaten sanctions. I mean, sanctions typically sit completely outside of any kind of trade agreement. So the idea that you would specifically go after a political party tells me that this is less about South Africa and more about the ANC themselves.
I want to look at sectors. I think that's a very, very important aspect of this. I know you mentioned that the size and of South Africa in relative to just how much we benefit from AGOA is a bit disproportionate. But are there sectors that could bleed from this? Are there sectors that could suffer if South Africa is ultimately excluded from AGOA?
Yes. But I think the degree of suffering will not be as severe as we think. Not that it's good if you're one of the companies affected, of course, but the biggest single beneficiary has been the automotive sector. Those benefits have largely gone to two companies, which is BMW and Mercedes-Benz. BMW already seems to have done a lot to find alternative markets, leaving us with Mercedes on the sharp end of this. So that certainly is a rather large problem for them, but it is not a problem for the whole of South Africa. It is for them, and obviously that's serious but not devastating. If we move beyond automotive, we get to sectors like aluminium, particularly the kind of primary aluminium produced by companies like South 32. They don't appear to be taking too much of a hit. Simply because the US is unable to get up additional aluminium producing capacity. And then we really get to agricultural goods, particularly citrus, which we're aware some citrus has now already been exempted. And the other big agricultural product is table grapes. And I think there's a fair shot at that being exempted as well. And then when we get beyond that, everything else gets quite small. So again, not to diminish the effect on individual companies, but those are kind of the big players. Yes, we have areas like wine, which certainly are not looking good in terms of this, but also it's not devastating. There are other markets that can absorb it. Perhaps we don't get as much for it, but I think those are the big ones. And I think for most of those, we can probably ride out the storm. I think the far bigger risk is if sanctions are imposed, even at the level of individuals. I think the consequences of that would be extremely serious for South Africa.
I'm listening to you speak, and I'm just thinking when the news broke that this bill has been tabled, there was such uproar on social media. People were losing their minds. But I'm listening to you speak. It's like, yeah, there are going to be ramifications here and there if it is indeed passed. But it won't be as big and as impactful to South Africa's economy as many might think. Are we being a bit dramatic with how we respond to this, especially looking at social media and just how tensions are right now with the United States of America and how South Africans feel like we should be responding to how the US has been treating us lately?
Yeah, so I think but we must separate out a few things. I don't believe the impact of losing AGOA was ever that significant. Again, we prefer to have kept it. I'm not on social media, so I have no idea what is being said there, but I'll take your word for it. I think there is a bigger challenge, though, which is kind of in the long term, and less that the US has an issue with us, but where we are choosing to align ourselves. And I think if we continue to pull away from the West, that will have consequences. That is where our investment comes from. The biggest source of foreign direct investment into South Africa is the US and the EU. We don't have investment to any material degree from the BRICS countries, for example. And so we have to be very careful, less about the US. At some point, President Trump will be out of office and there'll be someone else. But much deeper concern is where we are choosing to place ourselves rather than what President Trump is doing. And I think there, the consequences over time could become quite serious.
Very, very important. Just lastly, before I let you go, Donald, let's talk about the conversation around alternative markets. You mentioned BRICS, you mentioned how South Africa is aligned, and there's this conversation about alternative markets looking further into the east to try and penetrate those markets for whatever we export as a country. How important is that aspect? And is it time for South Africa to make a stronger push for the BRICS countries to tell them we are open for business and well, we are aligned to you, essentially?
Yes. So the answer there is I'm not sure, to be honest. Let me just kind of give you some statistics. If we take China and India out of BRICS for a minute, and we look at every other country in BRICS, then we export more to Zimbabwe in a year than we do to all of the other BRICS countries put together. So,
wow, that's something else. That is something else.
So there's nothing there. I mean, the point is, our trade with BRICS is really our trade with China and India. And is there an opportunity to do more? Well, to some degree, I think we could be pushing a lot more agricultural goods, for example, into those countries. That's not easy to do, but there is opportunity there. But there's pretty much nothing in our manufactured goods that we can make better or cheaper than China. So the idea that we should align ourselves with BRICS, I don't know what that means. We're not going to attract capital out of BRICS, and I don't think BRICS presents material new market opportunities when you step away from sectors like agriculture. Our mining sector, where we're extremely competitive globally, despite some of our horrible mining legislation, is seeing effectively no investment. So the idea that we can reorient to BRICS, what are we taking to BRICS that they want to buy? And what are we offering BRICS that makes them want to put their capital here? And on both of those counts, I don't see it.
There you go. Donald Mackay, Director at XA Global Trade Advisors. Thank you so much for those insights. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope we chat again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah, I think really, really interesting times ahead. That was Donald Mackay, the trade expert, and as always, a voice unburdened by diplomatic euphemisms. So AGOA 2.0 bill, man, I took a hard look at it, and it may never pass. I think that's something we should always keep in mind. It is a proposal at this point. Or it might be passed, just looking at the state of our relations with the United States of America. But I think what's undeniable is this US-SA relations have entered a new and I think a more combustible chapter. And it's very, very important, for our government to decide whether our geopolitical aspirations are to an extent worth the economic turbulence that may follow, especially during the Trump years. Because another thing we have to keep in mind is that this is the Trump administration. It's going to come to an end at some point, and where will we be 2-3 years from now after Trump, well, if he doesn't get impeached, after Trump 2.0 era? And are we going to have a more friendlier administration after Trump? And how much damage would the US and SA relations have been at that point? Let me talk to you. What are your thoughts? Do you think South Africa needs to take a hard look at our geopolitical aspirations, what we want to portray to the world, the morals and values that we so strongly stick by, and say we're not going to compromise those, even though it means ramifications, consequences, economic turbulence that might follow for some time, and we don't know how long, but for now, during the Trump administration. Are you okay with the "we won't be bullied" sentiment that President Cyril Ramaphosa always seems to echo? Or do you care a bit more about the economy, job creation, our relationship with the biggest and most powerful country in the world? There's always an opportunity to recalibrate. I think that's very, very important to note. And maybe South Africa might push that move um, for other countries to follow. I think the showing it BRICS was a positive move. It will be interesting to see how the BRICS and G20 leaders respond to South Africa ultimately not being allowed into the G20, being banned from the G20 by the US. Will they go and say, "Oh well, it's not our problem," or will they stick by the agreements that were made here in Johannesburg a few days ago? Really, really interesting times ahead. You can engage with us on our various social media platforms, or you can give us a call on 0116800355, or on WhatsApp. It's 061-766-0355. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be having our hashtag Africa Focus feature, and we'll be going to West Africa, Guinea-Bissau to be specific, where a military coup just ousted the president 3 days after elections. And we'll be speaking to research and political science lecturer at the University of the Witwatersrand, Dr. Kwinyai Taruvinga. More on that after this.